presented. Nicole, Stephen, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Tanya, you're up.
Thank you. So I thought I'd just go a little bit of a rehash back over what we've done over the last few months, just so that it's just to refresh your memory and all the hard work that you guys have put into this process. We started in January with committee of the whole budget meetings, where we reviewed core operating budgets. We looked at core capital budget. We looked at funding more infrastructure through and the tax increases related to those. And you guys made some decisions, some recommendations on that. And we also looked at the operating spending requests that had come in new initiatives. And so you guys have made some decisions with that. And all of that went out to the public. And so we had a public meeting where we presented all that to the general public. And then we had a comment period that was about 2 weeks long. And so we received the most comments I've ever received for a budget in the 12 years I've been here, I think. So that was really great. And so the summary of that is in the report that I've written that's in front of you today. And so I think it was fairly clear. There were definitely two themes. One was support for the golf course, from the golf course members, and then the other one was a lack of support, unfortunately, for the communications officer. So before you today is the budget as it was approved to go out to the public, which is a draft budget. So now we need to get to a final budget that can be then approved so that I can present the bylaws to you for your readings. So if this is the point where if there's any changes that you want to be made, or you want to have any discussions about changes to be made to the draft budget before it gets approved as a final budget, this is where the committee will make those decisions and those recommendations to go forward with council. So I'll leave that for you.
Okay, does any councillors have any comments on what you've proposed so far?
I'll start us off.
Okay, go ahead, Nicole.
A few comments regarding the communications officer, the comments that we've gotten back from the public. The concerns, when I was reading through the comments in the official public comments, the details of why people are concerned about a communications officer. There seemed to be a couple of common themes as to what they were looking at. One of them was related to the perceived need. So what they see as need or a lack of a need, that the staff should be able to do this themselves. The other concern was this idea of a spin doctor, and bringing in a spin doctor that is going to repeat what we hear from other staff and get more onto the marketing side rather than a true communications officer. I wanted to say a couple of words today. I almost said them at the last meeting, and I think I'm a little bit more understanding of where I'm coming from on this. I have not made it quiet. My mother was a master communicator. This has been something near and dear to my heart growing up and throughout my life, seeing how good communications in the public sector really help the entity serve their community better, because they have a better understanding of what their community needs, and the community has a better understanding of what's possible. A lot of our challenges have to do with the regulatory framework that we live in, the provincial rules that are put in place that we have to abide by, so we don't always have a whole lot of control over those. Our team is working full blast right now. From the sounds of it, City Hall is just going. Our development services are going as fast and hard as they can. And to take time aside from that to do communications off the sides of desks, the way it's currently being done, to me I see as a disservice. I am in full support of funding communications in some way for our community. I think that it's really important that we consider the grease that communications can provide to all of these wheels, to just help everything run smoother, to allow our team to do their job more efficiently, rather than taking time out of their busy days to try and do something that's not really in their area of expertise. I compare it, just on a final note, I compare it a lot between communications and food service, where everybody cooks. And I think that's great. I think that's important that everybody cooks for their family. And somebody who has a good skill at this and a background in this can cook for a large family barbecue. But if they're cooking for that large family barbecue, they're not relaxing on the patio having a beer, so they're not getting the full enjoyment out of that. And if we're going to take it to the level of this community, we're talking about a busy restaurant. It's time to bring in the professionals so that we can all do our jobs better.
Any other comments?
Sure.
Go ahead, Vic.
So I'm against the communications officer for a number of reasons. I think for me, a bit of it comes down to justifying the cost. Obviously, listening to Nicole's points there, she makes a lot of really great points, but to see the machine running, with grease and creating all these kinds of efficiencies, as you were mentioning, is a nice picture, and I'd like that to be the case. But if that's so, I'm curious what the cost savings are from having a communications officer. I don't know if Dawn wants to maybe weigh in on it, but is there areas where you think, because if we were to have a communications officer, we would be saving money, because right now there's redundancies and inefficiencies by not having a clear strategy? Or is it just that the communications will get better? Because if it's going to create all these efficiencies, then it would be worthwhile to take a look at that and see if we can't just work that into the budget and it would be sort of net zero. So anyways, that's one thing. And the other comment I would make is that I see a one-time fee maybe being more useful in streamlining our processes right now, because more than ever, communication is more simple than it has been in the past. To communicate is more simple, but that makes it more complicated because there's so many different ways you can reach out to people. So I'm thinking, if it just gets streamlined in one channel, and there's some confusion also about the legislation on my part, what things we can change and which things we can't. So that's another thing. I was hoping Alan would be here today to ask him some questions about that. But
Oh, Don may be with me.
anyway, so those are just a couple of my comments.
Sure, Your Worship. For communications, yeah, you can just say it's a communication officer that's funneling all the work through it, but if we had a communication officer that was responsible for communications and planning ahead and doing proactive communications, I don't know how you would measure that in terms of dollars. That would be the hard part. But for every time you have something planned, you're going to save a lot of hours in chasing it. And it's become quite evident in the past few years that that's what we're doing. We're chasing communications. We're not getting ahead of it. We're not getting on top of it. We're not engaging our community in a way that we could if we had somebody that was taking care of it. And that was their expertise. So it's I don't know if you could make it a flush in the budget, but it would definitely save us chasing and trying to get the word out there after the fact. Big projects like DCC projects may not have failed. And Councillor Cross, I agree, it may have anyhow, but it may not have if the right word was out there and people understood it more clearly. So that part's it's difficult to measure, but yeah, there is a cost savings because you're not chasing the message.
Right.
And what was the other you touched on?
Legislation.
The legislation?
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of it has changed. Actually, Aaron Orlando did a really good write-up in the paper, and I was talking about the fact that we've reduced advertising $20,000 last year and this year. So there is a lot of the legislation that we can't control. We have to put into certain papers for a certain amount of times. They have to say certain things at a certain size. But we have reduced a lot of it and reached out into the community in a way that the communications review that Barb had done said was more effective. So using more social media platforms, reaching out that way, council highlights, streaming the meetings. So we have taken a lot of her information and used it.
Right.
And saved money in advertising. Could there be more savings? Probably. And if somebody was really monitoring each and every dollar that went out through advertising, it could probably get even smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
a comment is, I'm not sure, if the community charter has some kind of flexibility where if we were to pass a motion to no longer require, special meeting notices to be printed on a piece of paper that I don't get until 3 months after the meeting's taken place. Things like that. They're small, but where is the flexibility in that? Those are the small things. I know it's kind of silly, but if we were to put all those together, it might make a big difference, right, in workload for.
So, yeah, I understand that when you get the little notices in your mailbox type thing, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, so that we could actually make a little tweak in our procedures bylaw.
Right.
And just have it at one spot for you guys. Perhaps it's electronic, but we
Right.
do have to follow the legislation, but we do
Right.
have to give it to you guys in one spot. But we could tweak our procedure bylaw to reflect that.
Yeah, those are the kinds of small changes
Yeah.
that might amount to something if we could put our heads together and just make it all sort of streamlined. But anyways, these are comments.
There's lots of efficiencies, and there's been lots found, but there is lots more to be found.
Yeah.
So part of the process when we're talking about communications officer or someone designated to be doing the communications, we have yet to see an emergency in this community. And it's not if we see an emergency, it's going to be when we see that emergency. I haven't spent some time with emergency services and watched my business over the years. Having a designated communications officer or someone that understands communication in the EOC, which is the operations center at the time of an emergency, will get the word out to the community as to what's going on, how things are handled, where we put people, how to get safe, all those sorts of things. Can somebody else do it? Yeah, probably, but having someone who actually is trained in those communications is a bonus going forward. Now, before we talk about whether we support it or not support it, it comes down to what's going to be the best for the community going forward as far as utilizing dollars for that position, because that seems to be the big thing. People are saying, I don't want a communications officer because I don't want you to spend the money. And so when I look at that and go, okay, so how do we minimize that impact on the community and still be able to have someone in that position to do the job, whether it's part-time, full-time, just on a contract basis? Those are the sorts of things that I want you to think about. And is there a way of making this work and still giving the community some assurance that we're hearing what they've said? Cody.
Can I say a couple things?
You can.
Thanks. So, just on that note that you mentioned there about the emergency thing, I agree, and I think that would be very important because it's inevitable that there will be a mass emergency. However, to just make a point, we don't even have that emergency plan written out on paper, is my understanding from the email that I had sent asking for it. I was told that we don't even have it. Or is it a digital copy that we don't have?
We have an older one.
So it needs to be
About
updated.
that thick, and we would revert to that until the new plan is written. Now,
So-
things change, that's why you revitalize the plans, right?
Right, I understand. So my question then, that brings me forward to roles, because I went back and read through the reports and what's her, I can't remember her name, Barb. So Dawn, just a question for you if I may through the chair, then seen as the person would theoretically be reporting to you then, what is, like, can you explain kind of what your vision, or like, for me, I think the role is great, and I've been telling people, I think it's great, I just can't justify a full-time position right now. I'm leaning towards now, let's maybe meet in the middle and look at a part-time position, and then if it's successful and we go, there's lots more we can do, then let's jump to a full-time. But going to a full-time person right off the bat worries me, one, for the expense, and I don't really think we have a full plan of what we want them to do. But I'd like to just hear maybe what your thoughts are on, like, what they're going to be doing, because is the plan for them to update the entire city website, or is, that's a few questions I had, or is that going to be contracted out to somebody else? Are they just going to be, for a couple press releases for Aaron and Jocelyn? Or is there going to be a phase? What do you envision as the role?
So, yeah, you've got to find people.
Because I read it through, and I mean, half of it, I don't know.
Yeah, and through your worship. So you've looked at the part-time and full-time comparisons on our duties. So what we've done was the review that showed what we're actually using and pulled out a few redundancies and kind of a few of the things that we could, low-hanging fruit that we could grab at right away. Now Barb is working on a plan, which is what we're going to be doing for the next 2 years. And that will be things like website upgrades, style guides. We have no standardization of our messaging. It's the formality. It's putting together the policies and developing what we need to move forward. And then the person that would be hired, full-time, part-time, contractor, whatnot, would plug in all those pieces. So we would have a guide. So the review showed us what we did do. The plan tells us what we should do. And that plan is going to take a couple months. Mrs. Floden's going to be going out to the public. She's going to be doing public engagement. So we find out what the public want. And she's going to be engaging in stakeholder groups like media, Chamber of Commerce, tourism. She's going to be pulling together these stakeholder groups and staff and council.
Right.
So, and putting together the plan. And then once we have the plan, that's when we move forward.
Yeah.
That's why I asked for, why the request is to have a full-time person not starting until after the summer, because then we'd have everything in front of us.
Steve, go ahead with your question.
Sure. I might want to draw a picture here, but I don't disagree that better communications is important for us to have. I strongly disagree with $100,000 at this point in time with the rest of the budget asks, right? Because I just fundamentally believe it's kind of almost irresponsible for us as a council to authorize an increase 3 times, the cost of inflation in total when you look at it. We've already got the sewer and water, we got the other stuff on top. It's a big jump for people, right? And I'm mindful of that. However, let's look at communications and say, okay, we want better communications, because I'd rather solve the problem than just bark about one potential solution. So when I look at it, communications, there's reaching out needs and there's reaching in needs. Reaching out needs are legislative requirement, issue-based, like DCCs, how do we organize a process around that? And then emergency, which I hadn't thought of, which is a really good point. So those are the 3 reaching out needs. The reaching in needs are repositories, so citizens going to get information, and our website is abysmal at that. And there's the immediate announcements, so the pool's going to be closed today because of this or that, or the rink is shut down or whatever, right? It seems to me that the reaching in needs could all be done through a better website, and training our citizens to go to one source when they want information is critical. That's streamlined, it's efficient, so our website, in my opinion, needs a complete overhaul. That project I could support in a heartbeat. The reaching out needs, the legislative, we have to do whatever they say we have to do, and that does take time, I don't dispute that. I believe that we've added funding to that with personnel in existing City Hall to look after that. I could be wrong about that. And then the issue stuff, my impression is, major projects where we need community input, like public hearings, DCCs, and that kind of thing, would be costed in that project, as part of that project. Now, then we could have a debate about, okay, is it better to have a full-time person who's cognizant of the city on hand right away? I could argue that would be a great thing. Or do you do it on an issues based? You do what you need to do. You hire somebody in town that's a communications person to handle that particular project. And it's part of that project cost as opposed to being a built-in salary, right? So I think I'm just uncomfortable with this ask this year, given we haven't looked at alternatives, is the bottom line. And yes, the emergency thing is a huge thing. Mr. Mayor, I totally agree with you on that. We don't necessarily have to solve that this year. Maybe we make, there's another big one here in the budget that I thought would be in this year that isn't, that we're going to have to ramp up and have a discussion with next year, which is bylaw enforcement. Do we want to go from passive enforcement, complaint-based enforcement, to proactive enforcement? That's got to be a big discussion next budget cycle, right? Particularly with vacation rentals, right? And maybe that also becomes the year we talk more about this. But in the meantime, I would be a lot more comfortable as a councillor if we were funding a website overhaul for the reaching in needs, which I think are a lot of the complaints about city information. And then I'd be a lot more comfortable if we looked at, alternative pathways on this particular year. But I'm not against better communications. Just want to be clear.
Mike, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, I'm quite torn on this. I think there's really good arguments on both sides, and certainly I'm very cognizant of the expression of dissatisfaction from the town. Certainly it's it's quite overwhelming that people are against fully funding this position this year. And once again, I don't think everyone who's against it fully understands what this position is and the reasons for it. But that's, perhaps a lack of communication. So there's certain things, the most important advantages of having a communication officer that I see are, there's a few big things that are coming up that are going to involve large public consultation, the OCP updates and bringing back the DCC bylaw update. And I can see potentially, saving money or breaking even on the position just from having someone who's dedicated to informing the town of what's going on and better engaging the town. Our city councilors right now are doing a great job of engaging. I'm a little concerned about the potential for burnout over the next couple of years. And if you look at this in the long-term way, just because we have city councilors right now who are very engaged with the citizenry, that's no guarantee that the next council will be. So I'm hesitant to rely on that. And then there's the whole thing with the emergency plans and communication. Because realistically, Revelstoke's surrounded by forest. The fire cycle on a lot of these slopes, like on Mount Revelstoke, is about 100 years, where it's reaching mature forest. It's ready potentially to burn. Cartier, Mount Mackenzie, McPherson's had quite a lot of fire safe work done on it, but there's, if Mackenzie burns, that's going to be tragic in a lot of ways. And the potential for loss of life, loss of property, and also, to be quite honest, a loss of economic drivers if the whole mountain goes up. That's bad. But to get back to communications, I think right now I'm leaning towards some kind of a compromise. Without having, we've had the review, but without having the plan in place, I'm a little hesitant to give the green light to a full-time employee.
Okay, so I'm gonna weigh in on that in a minute. Let Cody, you have something.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was saying earlier. So I have an idea, and just hear me out. Because the one thing I noticed too, there wasn't really many comments in the emails, but a lot of people were talking about bylaw, more bylaw enforcement, blah, blah, blah. So first question is, I was looking through the budget, it appears it's about $50,000 for an officer. So here's I'm doing some research on other communities with their part-time positions, and there's some community, sorry,
I was just looking at Tanya, I think it's a bit higher than that.
To be fully kitted out, yes.
Yeah, because.
so I think it was a $65,000, I think I read for the
That might be the wages.
kid. Oh, I didn't look up. Anyways, regardless.
What's your idea?
My idea is, because I was doing some research and looking at other communities, and there's communities that have part-time communications officers, and then they also have contracts with them where if, say a DCC or an OCP thing was to come up, that they have the authorization to pay overtime and like, oh, hey, the next month or whatever, for example, I'm just speaking hypothetically here, this event's coming up, you're working full-time, you're good to go, blah, blah, blah. And the council authorizes that and whatnot, and just...
Yep.
Anyway, so that's what some communities are doing. And then I also found that those communities as well, so there's that option. And then, whenever times get busy or whatever, again, the managers have the authorization to give overtime and whatnot, so that, because I was reading in some communities, they couldn't authorize the full-time, but they also needed a bit more than part-time, so they had that leeway, so let's work with the part-time knowing that, and there's lots of jobs that are like that too, where you can go from 20 to 25 knowing that you can go up. So my thoughts were...
It wouldn't even be overtime, it'd be more hours.
Yeah, I'm just saying overtime is more hours.
Yeah.
So this is a thought that I had, was maybe, because I don't support the full-time, but I do support the position, so looking at maybe doing a part-time thing there, and, and giving our management team the opportunity to say, when you need it and whatnot, go for it with the extra. And then taking the rest of the money, cutting that in half, so if it's part-time right off the bat, then theoretically we're cutting that 100,000, and then taking the rest of the money there, and let's throw that at bylaw. Because that's a department that we...
Well, you know what, that's a really decent
I
idea.
don't think we can wait until next year to address that, because a lot of the problems that we're going to be, working on pretty quickly here, to actually enforce those bylaws and motions we're going to be making, whatever they may be, we're going to need bylaw enforcement right away, and it won't be able to wait till the next year. So that was a thought I had, taking that 100, splitting it, we'll go part-time communications, let's figure out the cost to bump up some help in the bylaw department. But it's still 100,000, so the taxpayer rate's not coming down there. But for me, I think we're attacking two things, not just one. And I think and then the third thing is, sorry, I know you want to jump in. I still think that we should be authorizing an increase for the RCMP without increasing the budget, and then agreeing that if we do that, and for some God bless us reason that we actually hit that budgeted number, then we'll authorize to pull the rest of the money from the reserve for that year. But I think we should be doing that today for Kurt, increasing the authorized strength. There's a few communities I read in the paper last night just did the same thing. They're increasing officers without increasing their budget.
Yeah, and so we're going to get into that in a minute. So,
Those are my ideas.
Those are great ideas, because I was going to make the proposal that we give administration a portion of money for communications.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they need 50 grand, whatever, right? What do you think about bylaw?
Your Worship, thank you for asking. The reason I brought forward communications was because when we first met as a group, as your new council, it was one of the number one initiatives or objectives that was brought to the table when we were out grouping together, right? So that I was under the impression that it was one of the number one concerns through the election. It was one of the number one concerns that came out. So that was why I brought communications forward as a suggestion. Do I need more resources in bylaw enforcement? Absolutely. You see the numbers, you see the charts. Files have tripled.
Yeah.
Revenues, I have 1.5, but I work my half time a little bit more during the winter and the summer when we're busy. So I do have that little extra workload. And revenues have gone up, what was it? It was almost 200, wasn't it?
It was quite a change, quite an increase, because we didn't have much of a budget to begin with.
So they were able to write a lot more tickets and gain a lot more compliance and bring in more revenues. And we are, in my work plan for next year, we definitely have the goal of becoming, using the adjudication system and becoming cost effective, because other communities do it. It is one of the departments that you could actually become cost effective in. So a little bit of extra resourcing in there. This week, say it, I know we're on camera. I don't have bylaw enforcement because of certain circumstances.
The town knows.
Yes. And so my staff,
All those evil people are out with their dogs pooping in their cars parking.
my staff that are on right now are monitoring C-Clip Fix. We're reaching out, we're calling on the phones, and we are taking away from our jobs trying to make sure that the community's service. So,
Yeah, that's
so we are very under-resourced. I would be bringing that forward at our strategic planning for my work plan for next year, absolutely. So if there was a little bit more, it would take the burden off next year, absolutely.
Right. And if I may just go back to that, Your Worship. So I don't disagree. I think communications is a big thing, but I totally was there at that meeting saying, yep.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing is that it's then a balancing act of when you get to the table and figuring, holy moly, if we got everything we wanted, the taxes, like I said, would be skyrocketing, and we'd have a riot and people would leave the town, because we have to find the balancing act between needs and wants and maintaining, an affordable tax rate, so, the lower and the middle income class can still survive. With that being said, I think, like I was saying, and like Gary was saying, I don't know, I think it would totally be fair to maybe, Gary, with your thoughts, to if we want to just give the department the money, and then she decides what to do with it, whether that's hiring a position or using it for consulting, but I would definitely...
Or a contract.
Yeah, I would support you with that, and I think going with a certain amount of money, which for me was going to be 50%. And then it's my belief that I think we should be helping the bylaws right now. Like that's, you want to talk about communications doing it off the side of the desk. I mean, the last few weeks, I've had a lot of people come up to me, you guys have been doing a tremendous job. And I'm not saying you can get better and you don't need the support, I'm just saying it's been great. But yeah, no, I knew about this the other day, heard about this, and was going to bring it up in camera, but anyways, it's no bylaw officer working in the whole town for a couple of weeks. Oh my goodness. You know what I mean? So I think we need to support that department more. Now, I don't think we can afford to wait on that just with what we know is coming down the pipe here, vacation rentals, hopefully dealing with soon other things. Again, I don't want to be like, necessarily the last councils and councils before us where they made a decision that really they couldn't, and other communities have done it, that you can't really enforce. And if we beef up the bylaw department and support it a little bit more, then at least, we can hold a bit more to it, because there's going to be some things coming down here that we're going to want to hold people to.
Yeah, I think you're right. Stephen, you want to weigh in before I say more?
Sure, if that's okay with you. Yeah, I actually like Councillor Yonker's idea here. I mean, I can support it. I like it because I think it takes away fears I have and the taxpayers probably have around overloading. And there's one thing I know about jobs like that is you make work to fill the hours, or you have enough work. And if someone's limited to, making this up as I go, 24 hours, they prioritize. The list is longer, they prioritize. And I think that's a good thing to have at this point on communication stuff. Yeah. It just forces work efficiency in a fundamental way, which I think, I can support as a taxpayer and I can support as a councillor, right? And I agree. That's if we've got this on the table. I still think the total tax increase is too high. I think we should do more work on the whole tax package. But in this particular dimension, I can support this idea because I think there's an appetite in our community. I think they would thank us for this change. It meets needs that are real and that most people agree to.
Okay, so I want to deal with this before we move on. So what we're going to do here is make a recommendation to council. And then when it comes to council, you can say, yeah, I'm happy with that, right? Okay, so if we make a recommendation to council that we're going to put $50,000 to communication plan or communication, whatever you deem, call it, communication officer or whatever, right? And $50,000 towards bylaw. Go ahead, Tanya.
I was going to say the increase in 2019 is actually only $51,000 in total because it's half this year, half next year.
Okay.
So you have to have that again and have 25 and 25.
Right, but we're still dealing with the increase to taxes as
Yeah, you could avoid.
his worship.
Yeah, so if you did 25 and 25 this year, so you
Right.
still keep the 51 effectively, you wouldn't have another increase next year guaranteed.
Okay.
That's what you'd be avoiding, not this year's increase.
But is that going to allow
Yeah, but you would if you.
Dawn to do what she
I
needs to
don't
do?
know.
Yeah.
I don't know. The current tax increase allows for an extra $50,000 basically for a communications officer, half this year. And then it would imply that obviously if it's a full-time position, you got to bump up 50 grand more the second year, right? So that's where you've got to be careful because it's actually only $50,000 in 2019.
Okay. So,
Yeah,
So
I know
let's-
you guys are thinking on full,
We're still
it
dealing with
makes
half a
sense,
year.
but.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it'll still be half a difference.
Exactly, yeah, you might be okay still.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
well, we wouldn't
25,
need the time for the half year.
Yeah.
yeah. So is that going to work?
Because you still wouldn't be able to get, because we're already going to be half a year anyway, so it's still...
Sorry,
Worship, yes.
just I'll let you know, full-time bylaw officer benefited out, but without a vehicle and equipment and stuff like that, runs you about 80,000 a year with benefits and everything.
Mike?
What would it cost to our 1.5 bylaw officer
We just
to increase?
No, could we take our half to?
That,
To increase
that
the
would be
two.
for,
That would
yeah.
probably be what I would do.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean.
And maybe
That's
hire a
cost
casual.
effective, 'cause,
They already have
Days
the-
like today.
So a half-time would be 40, but because you're only doing it partway through the year, then you're looking at 20. But you've also got to buy on gear. So,
But increasing the part-time to full-time, the
That's true, you wouldn't
increase
have
the
to do
gear.
it, yes, that's true.
It would not increase.
What's the most cost effective?
Well, it depends on if
You might
the
need a
person
second.
that's part-time
Yeah,
wants to come to full-time, or if we need to get another half-time person.
But I still
So
think
you
it's
have to think
better
about
for
those
us.
options,
Yes,
right?
it's possible. And you'd have to have a vehicle if you've got 2 full-time people, I'm assuming. That's a cost we'd have to consider
For which?
for bylaw officer.
I have a vehicle.
Yeah, but you'd need 2, because you have 2
No,
officers.
they work together.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay, well, in that case.
Yeah, I think that's something we
One can be walking the beat, giving those tickets. They
Yeah.
won't give me a book to do it, so somebody got to.
We don't need to buy another car.
No, a lot of situations require law enforcement to work together.
Yeah.
So they would not need separate
No,
vehicles
okay.
by no means.
So I just want to make sure that you're talking about half and half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we were already,
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
And I understood that.
No, not 50.
No, I understand.
Okay.
that.
Oh, you got your
So,
thoughts?
So don't say no.
Mike, go ahead.
Could we make the recommendations separately?
Yes.
Okay. I also support the Councillor Younker's third point of increasing to another officer without increasing the budget.
So we're going to get to that in a minute, but I want to deal with these other 2 things first. So the question is, are you comfortable, now that we've had Tanya weigh in and Don's weighed in, so we're going to give some money to administration for their communications, and we're going to beef up that
To be
by-
divided between bylaw and communication.
Yeah.
there's 2 different recommendations there.
2 different
which We
recommendations.
could make differently.
Yeah. Okay. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Am I going down the right rabbit hole here as far as recommendations go?
Yes.
Okay, so we want to entertain somebody making a motion to deal with, we can't make motions today, can we? Or
We can make a motion to,
recommendation?
a recommendation to,
Okay, so we're going to make a recommendation. Tanya, do you want to weigh in?
Sorry, can I just say something?
Sure, of
Just
course.
have a question. Because we haven't actually done do we have to make the motion that's in the agenda first and then make a recommendation? We're gonna scrap that, make a new one?
No,
No.
we're gonna, in addition to those 2 that are in your,
Okay, sorry, this one I understand.
That's your final
yeah,
recommendation.
we need those 2.
Okay, so yeah, I'll make that one then, because I brought that one up.
Okay, so the recommendation, how I understand it, I think we can actually do it in one, would be to take the money that was budgeted
Yeah.
for the full-time communications officer and divide it into operating budget for communications and enforcement.
Unless you want to,
Part-time.
then it'd be reduce one budget and add in something different.
I think
I think it would just be divided.
was your point to separate them in case, so voting could be distinct on each issue? Yeah.
That's good.
So you're gonna vote for, you're gonna make a recommendation first to reduce the additional budget for the communications officer
To
Yeah.
part-time.
to half of what it is. I'm gonna just say 25,000.
Yeah, half of what it is.
And then the other motion would be to increase the budget for bylaw enforcement.
With the money coming
By
from
half.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
the money coming from the other half.
So we're not affecting the budget, we're just reallocating.
Right, just making sure that
Is
people
that
know what's.
clear as mud, Cindy?
It is.
Awesome. Okay, so we've dealt with that. Now,
So I'll give a recommendation and it would be moved and seconded. And-
okay, so Cody's moved it.
Yeah,
I'll second.
Wait, so you're splitting them up though?
Yeah.
Pardon? Yeah, we will.
Okay.
which one are we're gonna do which
We'll
one?
do the communications first,
Okay.
okay?
We're reducing.
So we're reducing that communications from full-time to half-time or part-time or however they need to do it whenever they get somebody for the rest of the year.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Half-time, yeah.
Half-time. Okay, so Cody's made that recommendation. Stephen, you seconded it. Are you ready to, any more discussion on that motion? Go ahead, Jeff.
I don't think I can support this. I'd like to see the money be used for a one-time fee for somebody to come in, some kind of consultant come in to implement Barb's plan with existing resources. I think communications right now are messy, they're not streamlined. Obviously, lots of people agree that they're not being done well, but I think with a good plan, which Barb has already contracted her to make, that's clear and simple and with an updated website, as Steve was mentioning, which is so important. I think it would actually end up being a lot less work than it is now, and we won't get pretty documents and a new fancy branding, but we would get clear, simple communication to our citizens in the community, and I think that's really what they're looking for, so that's what I'd like.
Perhaps, I completely agree. I think that making a decision now on part-time or full-time is a little bit preemptive before we have that full plan. I'm wondering if we can change the wording from communications officer part-time to just communications. And have that line in the budget where we're gonna put $25,000 into communications, whatever that looks like coming out of the plan. And then at the end of the year, we can reevaluate and look next year for what are we ready for now, having done all of that work. And reevaluate.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, maybe I misunderstood the motion, but that was my intention, is allocating the money.
Okay.
We're not assigning a position.
You're okay with that,
Right.
Jackie?
Giving communication, putting some money there, and then trusting our management to make the best decision for the city.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? That's clear now?
We're not hiring one, we're just
We're just budgeting. So it can
Sorry.
be used for contracting.
Just one more
Yeah,
comment
go
then.
ahead.
But then if we then assign that amount of money, is that not continuous every year? It's now in the budget forever. So I can't support that. I think it should be a one-time implementation.
Wait.
You can also adjust the budget next year downwards again if you
Right.
want. You can put it in as a one-time amount and not have it repeating out if that's what's desired.
If that's-
We would still have to approve the position when that comes up.
Yes.
Well, I think what Councilor Ryan is saying is that once you put 25,000 in there, it's
It's in the
in
communication
operating, unlike capital, where capital is a one-time expenditure, operating is an
Exactly,
ongoing.
that's-
This is an operating expense, it can't be put in, it can't be defined as being capital in nature.
Right.
And so that's where so then it really does need to be funded out of taxation. I think you're thinking about stabilization reserve fund, that's for when we go over budget and expense.
No, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking, if we add it into the operational budget now, it's sort of more difficult to take that out of the budget without then saying next year, oh, well, it's going to be a service level cut or whatever, right? I think that's usually what happens.
Yes,
Trying to
I
take
think
it.
just added in 2019. It would
Right.
still mean a tax increase, but it would be
Yeah.
this year's. And the next year, if you choose to continue it on,
Okay.
then there's no tax implications. And if you choose to remove it, then it saves you something for something else.
Okay, but then,
But then to
So
John's point, she
just so
would be
you're
hiring-
aware, if you do that,
Yeah.
there won't be a person hired
No.
to define what the plan is. There might be a contractor hired if they're needed done.
Right.
And even that, at that, I'm not positive that would work.
Okay.
So,
So that's what.
what
Thank you
you're
for
wanting.
Thank you for clarifying. That's what I wanted. So.
Just a
Stephen.
Yes.
thought on that. I mean, I really respect where you're coming from on that, Councilor Run. My only worry from an investment point of view is, so we hire a contract person, but come December 31st, 2019, they don't have a job. And we have to go through the budget thing, right? So we might lose someone that we've invested valuable time in bringing them up to speed on what the city's about and so on and so forth. So I do have a worry about that. I totally love the thought that we're not embedding a new structure.
I guess that's why I was kind of hoping it would be more of a capital, seen more in the capital lens than it would be from an operational standpoint. Because where I'm coming from is I definitely think we need an overhaul, and I think it's great that Barb's going in and analyzing everything. I think if we had a really simple solution, and of course nothing is ever simple, but if we had a very clear strategy for communication, I don't think it would take an extra person. I just think it would take cutting away some of the fat, right? Like,
Better
we don't need
execution.
10 different ways of communicating. We just need one, really simple one.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but what I'm going to say is if she's going to implement a plan and her plan states that you need a communications person, now you've just tied her up where she can't go forward with that
But
plan.
is she not, is her plan not based on our wishes or whatever, or what we ask of it?
Well, but she's going to make some recommendations to you. I don't think she should be tied saying, just because council wants this, this, and this. I think she should look at everything with a free mind and say, if you want valid communication, these are the things that we're going to recommend. And then that's up on council to say, yeah, okay, we think that's valid, and then go from there. That's all I'm asking. Nicole?
I have a question, just following that, because that's a good point, is that as we move forward, we live in changing times. right? Modern technology, like you said, is making communications easier and more streamlined than ever. It's changing how we do our work in all fields. So as we do that, one of the biggest bloats we have in our budget is wages and staff time. But that's based on old ways of doing things that have been evolving. So what is the mechanism as we find efficiencies? So if we invest $25,000 a year going forward into communications, whatever that means. So somebody's in charge of roping that side of things. If that then leads to efficiencies in other departments, what is the mechanism to either cut back on what we need? Do we get to shrink other areas as we gain these efficiencies? No. Or is it just getting more work? But then if we can never shrink from efficiencies,
That's where I'm going.
This is a bureaucracy.
That's exactly right. 'Cause you're gonna get-
So the thing is,
Yeah.
what we've just seen,
Yeah.
the TELUS Insights,
right?
is now telling us that there's more people.
Yes.
And so we have
So
one
points at one.
a couple points that we can talk about regarding that. So once Ingrid's kind of got some of that information nailed down exactly as to how that affects us,
Yeah.
then that might mean that we may find the efficiencies, but we're still understaffed, or we're
Right.
just gonna be.
So then we would just be able to do our jobs right
Yeah.
and properly without more
Do it
cases.
in a better way.
Yeah.
We're now communicating, our staff is doing it in a better way, and they're not, my concern is wearing staff out,
Right.
right? And so if we've got this great increase in volume when it comes to people, and we're not gearing up to deal with that,
Yeah.
we can't gear up until we know what the impact is.
Yeah.
But if we're not prepared to gear up, then all of a sudden, we're losing on that end because they might be efficient as they go forward,
Yeah.
but they're worn out dealing with it.
Right.
And so those are the concerns that I have.
Right.
So when we talk about the communication plan or putting money aside for that sort of thing, it's like, okay, so we give them that, and now, as Stephen was saying, we're not, December 31st, they're done, and we don't deal with the budget until May 2020. Now we've got 5 months of nobody doing the job, or not the way it was, and we have to restart the process. Go ahead.
So, Your Worship, I just had another thought as well. So if the 25 was put into communications operations as an operating budget, if next year I came forward and came to the realization and had measurements and proof that we needed a full-time person or that we could benefit from a full-time person, that money would be put towards it. It wouldn't just sit in there. That would go towards the wages.
Yeah.
So it is still giving us momentum to move forward by having some money in there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't keep that and then ask for the full-time on top of
No,
that. It would
yeah.
be amalgamated
Well,
together.
catch that.
So, yes.
Stephen.
Yeah, I was going to get to that point, but I want to back up for a second and say, just as a general comment, I understand when people use the word efficiencies, what they're trying to say. I really dislike that concept in public government and public organizations, because for me, it's what value is being delivered. And I don't think, it's not like a business where you realize a cost saving. It doesn't work that way. But if we're keeping the budget the same and we're adding resources, and the value to citizens doesn't go up, the quality of the communication, quicker permits being issued, better bylaw, however you want to measure it. If we're not doing that, then we're failing.
Yeah.
But for me, it's value delivered, not efficiency. Just a general comment. And then back to the issue at hand. So here's the thought. So could we this is pretty much the same motion that was on the table, but say $25,000 per annum, including $25,000 this year, and $25,000 guaranteed going forward, which means we have job continuity, right? And then we can deal with raising that if in the next budget, right? But at least you get the $25,000 in communications now, and that's all that's going into it, Jackie. Like, we're keeping it to a minimum, but we get to put our toe in the water. We get to see as counselors if this job is really worth increasing. I don't have too much issue with $25,000 per annum.
But it is every year.
Okay, it's there, yeah.
Can I say something?
Cody, go ahead.
Just my thought. For trying to make it happen.
No, good.
So, couple things. Well, it would be 50 next year.
No, I'm saying make it 25 solid only per annum.
That's what I'm saying, it's like,
No, that's not, yeah.
what do you get for that?
Get a part-time person.
You don't get anything with that. Yeah.
You can't even get a summer student.
Okay, so if we can just go back in here,
Yeah.
the original proposal was $100,000 for a communications person. So if we cut that to only 25, then yeah, you're gonna bring the possible tax increase down. Or, this is the 100 we're doing, let's be the council that gets more bang for our buck, we'll fix these issues, we're gonna get better bylaw enforcement, we're gonna improve at communications. Yes, this is quite the tax increase, but we're gonna work hard and, figure things out. But the town knows this tax increase is coming, we can scrap it all and whatever, but we do need some sort of communication. I just don't think we need that much. So I think we keep the 100 grand there, but then yeah, we split it up with the 50 going to the community. 25,000 in community. Here's the thing, if you say, well, let's put it on there that it's gonna be in there every year, nothing's in a budget every year, because we could sit here and vote tomorrow to scrap the budget by $5 million. Dawson Creek just did it, and now the city staff are scrambling going, oh my God. So nothing's actually in the budget. Yes, to your point, it's harder, because of course the staff will invest saying, well, if you do this is what you're gonna face, this is what's gonna happen. But I think to say that it's in there or it's not in there, it's the budget, and then we look at next year's the same thing, and then the staff come back and say, this is what we need, and then it's ultimately up to us 7 to make that decision. Do we want it in there or do we not want it in there? So we can vote yes or no now, and we're gonna have this conversation again in January to vote yes or no, and then we're gonna have the conversation in 2021 about everything. So my opinion is, I think we keep with the 100 grand. This is what we talked about for the last few months, but we split it in half to go communications, let Dawn do her job, and we'll hold her to that on seeing the better communications, and then the other 50,000 still is going to Dawn in another department, so we're getting 2 for 1. But I won't support going to one communications, and I also won't support scrapping at all. I get your point though, what you're saying with the bar, but realistically, if we're only allocating 25 grand this year because it's half, we're gonna get her report before we get something going anyway. So we can always make that decision to come back here and say we get this report in May or June or whenever I think that's when it's around expected. I don't think we can, we can instruct Dawn to say, look, this money's been allocated, hold off on spending that until we see the report, and then we'll sit down as a council together and make a decision what we're gonna do. And we might decide we actually want to put more money and pull it out of reserves, or we might want to hold off till next year, but I think we should be allocating a little bit of money at this time, just not as much as the original proposal. So I would like to just we can still obviously talk, but my motion will just be standing. I'm not going to change any more.
Okay.
We'll just do the 50%, and we don't need to put it as a position, just allocate it as a lump sum, and a lump sum to the bylaw enforcement. And if it's voted down, that's fine, but I don't want to change it.
Okay, so Michael and Jackie.
I completely agree with Councillor Younger that this decision right now, just to stick with the communications officer, is not setting anything in stone. The plans from Barb's going to come back, and we're going to make another decision, have another look at it, and really decide what we're going to do. But allocating some money towards it is prudent, because realistically, we're probably going to want to do something. And so having that money there. But in terms of next year, I'm just wanting to clarify, I can't remember, I believe there was in the potential budget a part-time communications officer. Was that 60,000 a year? Because I don't think it works out.
No, it was add half of the full-time position, half added this year and then the other half next year to get to one full position.
Well, any which way, I'm not sure that $50,000.
50-odd thousand.
Yeah, it was 52,625.
52,625. Okay, but then increasing a part-time bylaw officer to a full-time, I think, would be less than $50,000. So, whereas
Well, that depends on if the part-time officer wants to become
Yeah.
full-time.
Yeah.
If we have to bring another person in, then there might be some gear and stuff we need to get that. So we might end up with 1 full-time and 2 part-time.
Which actually might be better, just theoretically, for operational coverage. You have 3 bodies instead of 2, but we don't know what the decision he wants to make.
So, but for this year, $25,000, because I see that one happening sooner than communications
But we,
officer.
sorry, but Dawn would control the start date, so she would probably be July 1.
But she's gonna work.
Well, it
with us.
depends on, you put out an RFP and you try and get people in and you look at it and say, who do we want to hire? Yeah, it's a process. There's no, it's not going to happen overnight.
I just think it's beneficial to allocate some of this funding here. And this is the other thing, Jackie, because I agree with you, and we've talked a lot about it, and no offense to anybody else, but this is compromise, because my worry was that 4 of you were going to vote this through at the $100,000, which I'm heavily against. So we have to work together as a team to compromise and come up with a better solution. So we're still spending the money, but in my opinion, I think we're getting more bang for a buck here, because we're getting a few different things we're attacking rather than just one. But yeah, I don't think we should not be allocating any money.
I need to let Jackie speak.
So my only problem, I think, and I'm trying to figure out my own thoughts on this because I sometimes have trouble making what I'm thinking, communicating. Come out. But I think what my problem is that Barb's plan seems to be based on having a devoted resource. And I have a problem with this because it's sort of saying, like, we've got a broken machine, so we're going to buy like a really brand new smaller machine to sort of like do its job in the meantime, where I feel like Barb's plan should be to fix the machine with existing resources, and then once we have that plan and we're trying to work it out, if we're realizing that it requires more resources, then at that point we can decide if it should be contracted out or not. So I feel, I know that it's going to require more resources.
I absolutely get what you're saying. And what I'm saying is, if you put the money to that, and then as Stephen said, it ends at the end of the year, we still have that momentum to carry on next year. But what happens if she comes back and says, if she comes back and says, no, you don't need a full-time officer, you only need a part-time officer, or...
Well, we know she's not going to say that because she already said she wasn't going to say that in the plan. So she's already basing it off of us having a resource person. To me, that's an issue. It's like they're not even willing.
It's an issue for you, but it's not an issue for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
And the difference between that is you're not seeing the value in that, and that's not wrong, because you're thinking there should be the capital stuff done, like the website and whatever. And then I'm saying, well, maybe she's going to say, in addition to that, you should have somebody else. And all I'm saying is, let's give them the funds. If they don't utilize the funds, if they don't need that person, they don't have to hire that person. But by the same token, I get what all you're saying and what the community's saying is, let's not put another person over there if you don't need it. And you two have already stated, if you don't see the value, because this is your motion on the table, if we don't see the value in that,
We'll take it away.
yeah.
You scrap it.
So,
Yeah, and
go ahead.
yeah, I'm philosophically aligned with what Councillor Ryan just said completely. And you know what, Don, I'll be really honest with you. When I heard you talking about what they would do and stuff, when you said branding activities and it would lead and more contracted services to improve other things, I started to get really nervous as a taxpayer, right? Because I don't care about branding, right? I don't think that's important. And I know that's not full context for what you mean. I'm just saying I get nervous, right? So this is where I think, that's where we have our fears. That said, Jackie, we're all new to council. I have huge concerns, and I've expressed them publicly and with this group around service standards, value, and value creation for citizens. So that said, it's hard for me to also deny the opportunity to see what value can be created. So I'm willing to support this compromise, which I think is actually quite smart, even though I have the same fears, because I want to see what value is created. And that's going to tell me a lot for a year. And I'm willing to invest the $25,000 this year to find out what happens, right? Let's see.
Okay, John's going to make a quick suggestion.
So when I'm sitting here thinking, we're going to leave the same amount of money in the budget. That seems to be the intention. What if it was just allocated to be divided as required between by law enforcement and communications. And then we saw how that fit in.
Well, I mean, my only issue,
Because if maybe something comes out of it as, out of the plan, website redevelopment, well, you're looking at $75,000 for website redevelopment.
right, but we have other funds for that too.
Well, it was actually a capital project when it was done. We don't have funds.
My only concern about that, Dawn, is to be completely honest, we gotta go sell this to the taxpayers.
Yeah, fair enough.
We gotta do that, and I'm more than willing to do it. I'm not sure I'd be comfortable selling that concept as much as, look, we're not authorizing a full-time position. We think we're doing a part-time to see what the value created is and judge it accordingly for the next budget cycle. We know bylaw enforcement needs some resources, so we put that there. To be quite blunt, I think that's completely saleable to the public.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not taking that away. What I'm saying is it might not cost as much to increase bylaws enforcement as it would be to maybe hire a contractor this year to clean up the website.
But if you need to move that money around, could you just come to council if we had to, we could just authorize it?
Yeah, depending on the dollar value you're talking about shifting around, there's a certain level of authorization that we have as staff.
And then I would support that. I mean, I think you should go for I'm just putting myself in your shoes. I think you should go for the proposal at the table, and if we need to redo the website, which I personally think we do need to do.
I don't know.
Should come back for
Maybe
that
out of the
money.
bathwater though.
So, you're gonna put a proposal on, council's gonna vote. She's gonna accept whatever you vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
She has no choice.
Well, I understand.
So, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that Jackie's raised a valid issue because value for her is very important.
Yeah.
And so she's trying to communicate with us that I want to see that value. So she's concerned about seeing that value, that we're going to lose the value by allocating that money. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, value.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm
No,
trying
that's
to help.
fine. No,
Yeah.
value is, I don't know, it's dependent on the individual, right?
Sure.
It's not that I don't see value in communication. I'm just, I'm a little bit worried about, how the money would be used and what the plan is that Barb has and how it's focused, I guess. But as Steve was mentioning, I do see his point in that if we don't give them the resources, then it's a shame because then we don't know what kind of value could be created. I got a little lost in the last few minutes because now I'm just not sure if there's an option to just allocate that money towards the website. Is that a capital project? Where's the overlap?
No, so,
Okay.
if I might, your worship,
Yeah.
so just like with your concerns, it almost sounds though like you have a lot of concerns about the actual report and the way that she's doing it. And just from like the team that was here, they've done a few others in other communities, and the same thing, if you just go and look though, and it's like, I don't know, it's like, I don't know the comparison, but they went to Nelson, they're the head of communications, same thing. They told Nelson, look, with your current resources, here's the plan, with your current resources, you can't really fix anything, so in my sense, you're almost wasting the money by getting a report to tell you what you already know, is that you need more help. I think what we're disagreeing on is how much help we all think we need. But they told Nelson the same thing. You need a full-time officer. From what I've been reading, they're probably going part-time because they can't justify that jump yet. But they're doing something. I totally hear you with the value thing. I think we all are worth the value. I think what we do, and again, I think we do the 25 here, the 25 there, and with the direction that Don's just going to hold off, we're not going to go and spend that yet until we get this report, and then council's going to work really closely with Don to see what are we going to do once we get this report, and then let's make a decision. Because we might get this report and go, holy moly, we actually need to throw a lot more money at this right now, let's get this fixed, or we might go, okay, yeah, let's 25, these are the things we agreed to fix, let's make sure they get fixed, and if we add, because I think for next year, we're going to actually start, budget starts already in July and August, so we got a lot more time to plan and set out our goals. We're also going to have our strategic planning pretty quickly here, so then that will allow us to make better decisions, and just based off of strategic planning, we're going to know where we're going to want to align more resources. But I think with the communications, if Don's reporting back, and once we get the report, then we're going to sit down together would be my thought, and then really from this report and say, okay, what are the first few things we want to tack off? Can we do that with the money, kind of thing? But I think, yeah, my biggest fear is if we don't allocate anything, then we've just spent, I don't know what the media said it was, 12 or 15 grand on this report. We're not doing anything all year. We spent that money, and then we're going to have to allocate more than 25 grand next year, because that might only, 20 for this huge report, theoretically, and maybe I'm wrong, but 25 grand to cover a whole year of communications for me is probably
They
not going
wouldn't
to
be
be
hired
much.
right away, would they?
We're not even saying that person would be hired. We might use the money for something else. So this money that we're allocating is not for a position. It's just for communications in general, 25. And it's not going to be spent until we get this
But
report.
Dawn was just saying that she's probably not gonna hire somebody if it's just $25,000, right?
That's
And
next
in
year.
December.
Would be a contracted service, right?
Because the position this year wouldn't be going out until half of the year anyway.
Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
So
I get that.
we're spending 50 grand, allocating $50,000 to be split the way you see fit between bylaw, excuse me, and communication. So 25 theory. Excuse me, I got a frog that grows up. I need vodka.
You know what, we're kind of going down a rat hole here, but, and I don't want to do that, okay? I think we're on the verge of a solution here.
Yeah, sorry.
But no, you did not send us there, because I share those, my whole spiel was about, we haven't explored enough alternate pathways yet to spend this kind of money. I'm uncomfortable with, I want someone hired. If we're allocating a half-year position here, I want someone hired, because I think that's an investment. They need to learn the city, they need to work with the staff, they need to learn the nuances. I don't think, I'm less comfortable with supporting $25,000 to be used for whatever, right? I don't want that. If I'm giving you, if we're voting for $25,000 for the city to use for a communications person on a part-time basis, then I think that's where the money should go, because we're building an asset there.
So
That's my thought, right?
So, Your Worship, I'm expecting the plan to come in from Barb in June, probably May. And she, like I said, she's going to be doing a large public consultation and meeting with stakeholders. It's going to be what the public wants to see for communications, brought forward to council to make a decision as they see fit. So I wouldn't be looking at hiring anybody until, so it would only be a half-year, half-time position, which 25 would cover, right? So,
Will it though? Because 75,000, which is the base salary divided by 12, is $6,250 a month.
yeah, and it might be something that I wouldn't.
So it might be more of a
start till
fall
August
position.
or
Yeah, okay.
September.
But you can deal with it.
But what if the plan comes in and trying to find somebody isn't exactly easy, and there is one suggestion from her to say do communication training for all the front-end staff, and that's something that we could just hire someone to do, and that would be a fix, and then maybe at the beginning of January, I hire a part-time person for the year.
Yeah, that's why
That's my only
Okay.
concern, and if you
Okay.
guys are concerned about value, if I could give you better value in a different way, having that flexibility would just be.
And that's my biggest fear. I don't want to assign it to a position, because who knows, we could offer 150,000 and you might not be able to get people because they can't find a home to live. So my motion will just stay as dedicating it just to the general communications, and then council will work with Don to then decide when we need to, how we're going to allocate those funds.
Okay, fair enough.
Could Cindy read the motion back to us, just so?
I can, that the proposed communications budgeted amount be reduced by 50% for 2019. That's the first one.
Okay.
And ta-da.
So it's not necessarily,
No.
but how do you take it out of wages and put it into operations? Does that need to be in the resolution? Be reallocated to operations?
Yeah,
Just needs to be a line item.
yeah, I think it just needs to be a line item.
So reallocated for communications.
Well, theoretically, we're not reducing it by 50.
Yeah, we were going to do a motion to choose.
So you're gonna take, so you're going to,
Do you want me to read the other one?
What's
That hasn't been made yet?
Yeah.
That the savings realized with the 50% reduction in the proposed budget amount for communications be allocated to increase bylaw enforcement for 2019.
yeah, so it's just the wording of
Not, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think you need the year on there because it would just be a reallocation.
Yeah, you wouldn't need the year.
Does that make sense though? Do you understand me?
Yep. So we could clean up whether or not you need it to be reallocated.
Yeah, whether we need to
You guys can
clarify
fix the
this just
wording?
in general and not for a position.
Yeah, because it's just a recommendation, sort of.
Right, for for council next week.
Yeah.
So then we can clarify next council if we have any concerns with the wording or whatnot. But the general idea is to reduce it and then divvy it.
Yeah. You guys all okay with that?
There's a motion
So,
on the table.
I know there's a motion on the table. So that motion is going to stand because Cody and Stephen want that wording to stand. Is it clear to you, Mike?
Yeah.
The way it was read out? Okay. Any further discussion on that motion before I ask for a vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Note Councillor Ryan in opposition. Okay. So now we want to talk about, Cody, you draw third point dealing with the police officer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Second
Oh, no, we have to do the second part.
Oh, yeah, I gotta do the second part. Okay, what's the second part?
So that's that it'll be divvied 50-50 between communications and bylaw from the savings.
Okay, all right. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? No, Councillor Ryan is opposed. Motion's carried. Now we're going to carry on to RCMP. So we've talked about the RCMP. Cody and I had that conversation. I think Tanya's had that conversation with us when we first talked about budget deliberations. Right now, we're paying for 10.3 or 10.6 police officers. We have 13, is it 13 allocated? So if we allocate one more and they don't come up to the number of 14, then we don't.
Budget of 12.
Whatever it is.
Budget of 12, authorized 13, budget of 12. So
Budget of 12.
Authorized 14, budget of 12.
Okay, so if they don't come up to that, then of course we don't pay for that. Then there's no tax increase. If by some stroke of imagination that we actually get all 14 officers, then at that point in time, there's going to be a line item for an extra police officer.
Well, sorry if I may, Your Worship, just correct you. Only if we hit 12, if we hit the budget.
Yeah.
Right, and if we go up to 12.1, then we can just pull from reserve funds
Yeah,
and then look
exactly.
at for next year. But we don't have to increase to 14 because somebody listening like, oh my God, that's $250,000.
Yeah,
It's
no.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would theoretically would be adding an officer and not increasing taxes.
Correct.
At this time.
At this time, correct.
Pardon?
It's a win.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
Stephen, you wanted to weigh in?
Well, I love the idea, but someone's going to have to give me the Coles notes so I understand it from explaining
Okay,
it to a
so
citizen.
I'm going to get Tanya to do the explanation because she's,
I think I
she deals
understand,
with
I just
money.
don't know the short form.
okay.
Well, why don't we just write it on the
Well, it's, yeah, so authorized strength is the number that they're allowed to have, but we don't pay for the full authorized strength because sometimes they'll be off for sick leave or there's other reasons why they're not actually physically here. When they're not here, we don't pay for them. So they're still part of the numbers, but we're not paying for them. And so then, so it creates a bit of a glass ceiling, that 13 for the RCMP. So if you increase and you move the ceiling up to 14, he might have 14 authorized officers, but we're probably not, we never get billed for full 14. Right now, we're getting billed, in 2018, we got billed for about 10.2, 10.4, maybe 10.5 out of 13.
and budgeted for 12.
I budgeted for 12. We had an authorized strength of 13. We paid for 10.
Right, and based on what Kurt said in his report, he's got people moving, so
There's constantly
we're
people
extremely
shifting around.
unlikely to hit.
Yeah, so if he gets,
So just pay attention, you guys are weighing in, but I think
Yeah.
Nicole actually
Yes.
had her hand up.
Sorry.
No, totally fine. It's a great discussion. So when we come under budget, we budgeted for 12, we got billed for 10.4, whatever that is. That difference goes, from my understanding, into the stabilization fund in past years.
does now, yes, that is a new thing with the new policies. So it wasn't something that was done historically.
Okay, what was that historically?
Historically, it just fell to the bottom line. So if people were under over budget, then we just had to.
So now that we have that stabilization fund, so if it's under, and if we go over for a short period of time, we can absorb that, and then if it stays up, then we can look at that new spot. But I think this is a great win-win and a no-brainer in my mind.
Because we're losing 3, he's gonna get back for sure 2.
I know the reality, the reality is a seasonal stuff.
But there is risk.
Well,
Yes,
yeah, so,
acceptable risk.
so yeah, we gotta know, yeah, we should all know that there's a risk that we might have to pull from that reserve. But there's a 33% vacancy rate in the province of BC right now. You guys were watching the news in Manitoba the other
I
day.
think it's a magical risk.
They have an authorized strengths in the city of Manitoba of 47,
Yeah.
and they only have 19.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for their to get numbers right now, but by authorizing one more, Kurt is gonna be able to then get another one more officer.
And this is not creative financing, this is being done in other municipalities
Yeah.
for this sort of
It's
thing.
precedent.
It's
So,
called budgeting for your expected expenditures,
Right.
rather than, you don't budget for your maximum expenditures, you budget for your historical expenditures.
So and then
Okay.
if I just may, like, again, when I was talking about Dawson Creek, if you go and Google it, they've actually done the reverse now, where they are authorized for 26, they've only ever had about 18 or 19, and then their extra money went to reserves. But to save money and to cut now, they're reducing their authorized down to like 20, so it'll save them like $800,000. But that was, and now the police department has come out and said, whoa, hold on a second, you know what? We need those officers, and if we actually get them, but now we won't be able to get them, so now they're stuck with what they have. They can't ever have more. So if they get them back from
Well,
mat,
if they change it again.
if right currently, because he was saying we've got a couple coming back from mat leave, now they're gonna have to transfer people out because they're over their authorized. So there's pros and cons to both ways. But I think for our community, this is a win-win right now.
ready at this point in time it is. So, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make that as well,
Okay.
whatever it is.
Whatever the motion is. So we're making a motion to authorize
Increase our authorized strength to 14.
to 14.
And
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Jackie's going to second that. Is there any further discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. So I have one more item that I want to bring up that was prevalent in the emails that you got, was the allocation of $50,000 for the golf course. So we've allocated $50,000 for the golf course for 2 years, and the golf course was actually asking for 5 years, and that wasn't in any documentation, but that's a conversation that's come around this table. Are you okay with what you've allocated, or do you want to increase that? I'm asking that conversation now.
Just,
Go
can I
ahead,
just
Cody.
say something to that? Yeah, I read all the emails and thanks for them for sending them. I'm comfortable keeping it at the 2 right now because I think they've been really successful. We've seen some stuff about it, and I think RMR is going to probably be announcing pretty quickly about theirs, and I think that Jackie made it, or Councillor Ryan made a really good point when I was talking to her about it, that this golf course hopefully will become even more successful if another one comes into town. So I think at this time, I'm comfortable with the 2, and then we can come back. But again, I'm hesitant, like Jackie was saying about the other thing of putting this money in, might be hard to take it out. Clearly, we've seen the communities was against this communication, but very largely in favor of supporting the golf course. So I think that I can support the 2, but no more.
Is that the consensus around the table?
Yes, well, for me, my
Okay,
consensus.
Nicole?
Yeah.
Jackie?
Yep.
Michael? Okay.
I'm good with the way it is.
Jackie had a question, and she brought it up when she first came in, and that's about allocating some money to the Revelstoke Cycling Association in the amount of $10,000 and putting that in the budget as a one-time thing if they do not get funding elsewhere. And so, and she's willing to go all out with that. I'm saying if we don't go elsewhere, because I would like them to ask for grant and aid or something from the CSRD. Now, they may get something, they may not. So my question to you, Jackie, do you want to put a motion on the table?
I do want to make that motion. I just want to make one point that I spoke to Alan, and he had recommended a couple weeks ago that if I was going to make that motion, to suggest it gets taken out of the stabilization fund or operational
Okay.
Put
contingency.
it in as a capital project.
Yeah, put it as a capital project, just so that it's not he said, so that it wouldn't have to be a tax increase.
Okay, so that makes sense.
That's
That
part of
makes
it.
sense.
That's part of it. Capital.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, at the last, was it the council or committee meeting, did they get a grant and aid?
They haven't asked. I was just at CSRD today.
No, but for the
They didn't didn't ask for
The
the
city
city
hall one
grant.
that you guys did, I wasn't at that meeting. There wasn't one there.
Well, there's a limit of 2,000 on it.
Right, I read
Yeah,
that.
that limits only.
Because okay, so at the, what was that meeting called we were at, Ingrid? Oh, the RMI meeting. So, yeah, there was a request in there, but it wasn't, can I talk about that or no? Yeah, because it was a committee meeting.
It wasn't in camera.
No, it wasn't in camera.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so there was a request in from them, but it wasn't in specific for the trail maintenance, it was more to support that pump track or whatnot, but I wouldn't be so certain. It was, from the committee, it was ranked lower, so I don't think they'll be getting many funds, if any, from there. So my question just then is for yours, because I heard Gary's point, so is your motion to just give it to them, or to wait to see if they get it from the CSRD and give it to them if they don't, or you just want to give it to them no matter what?
Well, if it doesn't incur any tax increases, I'd be in favor of just giving it to them. I think it's a huge asset for the people that live here. And it sounds to me like they're working on finding a way to fund that trail maintenance in the future, and they just need some help for the next couple of years. So that's why I'm in support of just giving them the funds. But if you think it just sort of hedges our risk and, you know,
Well,
we just be
and-
clean
and
of it and the CSRD can take care of it.
You have to put on the motion you want to put on. And it shouldn't be 10 grand, it should be $99.60, because I give them $40 already.
You got it.
Anyway,
That'll get changed.
I think that if you're gonna put a motion on the table and you wanna do that, that's fine, but let's just hold that money and see if they get
Right,
something.
sure, yeah, that's
Right?
fine.
Rather, because it's in our stabilization fund.
Of course,
So,
yes.
So then the motion should probably be contingent on not receiving money from the CSRD.
Would you be okay
Sure,
with that?
yeah. That's
Okay.
right.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Michael, you wanna ask a question first?
Well, if they don't ask the CSRD for money, I'm not as comfortable giving it to them. So the motion
Makes
that
sense.
stands
So it needs to
doesn't
read that,
include that.
okay, also contingent that they ask and do not receive. So if they don't ask, they don't get anything?
Sure.
Are we
And
comfortable?
I believe they might have asked already. I saw Alex on the street, and he said that he was working on that, so, but I haven't seen that cross
It's a good point.
the desk yet,
So
but
I
it's,
asked.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
totally. Good.
okay,
I'll second that motion.
okay. Any further discussion on that motion?
Is that for 1 year?
There's one time.
Just a one
Yeah,
time,
one time.
a one time, $99.60.
10,000, my motion.
I'm gonna claw back that $40 somehow. Anyway, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor? Motion's carried, thanks. So there's, any other things that you guys want to talk about, or can we go to these motions that are in your package?
Well, I'm just making a quick comment as well. There was quite a few comments in the engagement comments, talking about tax rates going up, the tax-paying population, who's paying into this, especially with the TELUS Insights data coming in, showing how big we potentially are and probably are, and how much of a tax base we have. It's not to do with emotion or anything, but it is something that I'm firmly excited and hope we all push to look for solutions and ideas of what to lobby the provincial government for to help modernize how we fund our municipalities so that we can widen the tax-paying population so that these increases are not going on this section of our population. Because I think that's the bigger disservice. We're talking about carving up this pie when it should be the bigger pie.
Yeah, and so right now, the only way that we can get income
Yes.
is by property tax.
Exactly.
right?
So I want to just address those comments in the emails and the letters, was that we are aware that we're leaning on the taxpayer, the existing taxpayers, more than we should, but that this is where hands are tied, but that we're trying to untie them.
Yeah, and so we'll have those conversations. You know, those of us who are going to UBCM, we can have those conversations as well with the ministers. And, yeah, September. And then we can, you know, see what they're willing to do. That doesn't mean in the meantime, or some of us are going to Silga and Penticton, we can make some recommendations there for Silga to talk to the UBCM, and then motions can get carried on from that sort of thing. And it's about looking at another way to fund municipalities so that we're not not dependent, it's kind of now we're in that big brother thing, if it's an election year and everybody's happy to give us a grant.
Yes.
And, so you kind of look at that.
You
and
see that
we're-
big announcement?
we're looking at that and saying, can we have a stable way of having an income come in that it's not always dependent upon the people that own property in the community?
Especially
But,
when hitting 24,000 is a high in August.
Exactly.
yeah,
No
so-
wonder our sewage plants failed. I mean, what's it built for 24,000 Coopers?
Exactly. So bigger conversation than here, but I just
So
want to get it on.
I'm going to go back to the motion that's on the table. Is that okay? So Jackie?
There's,
Oh, we voted on
That's already
that.
done.
Okay.
There's no motion. That was
So there's no
between
motion.
motions. That's
So
all.
Cody, carry on. Sorry.
I just, kind of in relation to Nicole's thing too, like, obviously one of the big themes in town too is affordability or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to maybe have, talk to Alan, because he's not here, and he might be watching, probably not. Can we talk and sit down, I understand our hands are tied due to legislation and everything around taxes, but I was talking to the mayor of Belcarra yesterday, Belcarra, and that was an interesting chat, because they're having speculation tax have been put on them. It's been all over the media, but we don't. And I don't know, a lot of people are against it, a lot of people are for it. I mean, a new poll just came out saying a lot of people are for it. But in terms of affordability, that might be something that maybe as a council we should talk about and sit down together about maybe reaching out to the government if we decided it was in the best interest. But maybe if we could just get that on an upcoming meeting to talk about those ideas.
We'll have a conversation about that, and we may do that informally. And I'm just going to say, careful what you wish for, because I just saw a notice the other day that the provincial government has got their tax, that speculation tax, less than what they're thinking, and they've already earmarked that for something else.
Oh, I know.
They haven't earmarked that for affordability.
But I'm not
right?
saying about bringing that tax. I just want to have a general conversation as a council about just creativity and options that are out
Yeah,
there.
and so, that would be a great thing for us to bring up, strategic.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to say one other. I just had a question about taxes, if we could, because we're talking about taxes. Do you know roughly through the chair, obviously, but what do we get every year from gas tax?
Gas tax is about it's about 350 to 400.
That's what comes into the city from the feds.
Approximately, yeah. I think
Okay.
last year it was 2 equal payments of about 185,000.
So I just had a question on that then. With the promises that are being made now for the election, hypothetically speaking, if the Liberals were elected and they committed to that, what would we do with that extra money? Does it then just come in and go to reserves, or?
No, it goes, we put it into a reserve on its own because there is certain criteria, so it's like, we consider it a conditional grant.
Okay,
And so it does need to be spent on
certain things.
what I'll refer to as greening projects. So it's usually used for money, for projects that are going to improve, carbon efficiencies. Or,
Okay.
we can't use it, say, to pave a road necessarily, but we can use it to add curb and gutter to a road to help improve the water, the way the stormwater is treated.
Okay.
So that's the kind of things that we try to use it for. We have a number of different things. We've used it for our sustainability coordinator for a number of years, which has been a huge asset to the city. So yeah, there is a number of different things, and if that amount gets larger, then there's definitely uses for it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have two motions on, in your package. Jackie?
Sorry to interrupt before the motions, but I had also one other question
Okay.
for Mrs. Nadeau, if that's okay. Someone had made a comment in the letters about passes for the aquatic center for hotels. Do they pay for those?
Yes, they do.
Okay, that's what I thought. But I think in the letter they were insinuating that they didn't.
They thought it was free passes for
Yeah,
tourists.
there's an annual rate for hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, and campgrounds.
Okay.
So passes run from September to September, and then each hotel, you give them a template, and they make their own passes, and then their guests submit them to the aquatic center when they're staying at the hotel, and then we track the pass numbers
cool.
for each hotel.
Nice. But it's not at a cheaper rate than,
Yes, it's at a reduced
it
rate.
is at a reduced rate.
Because they buy in bulk.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it's about 1,800 a year for a
Yeah.
hotel.
Otherwise, I guess there'd be not really an incentive for them to buy them, other than to be able to give it to their guests.
And quite a few of them are using that as advertising free pass, you know, so you look at their advertising, free pass to
Well,
the
yeah,
aquatic center, right?
our family friend owns the hostel in town, well, the big hostel in Twyla's, because they just love it.
Yeah, it's a great thing, so,
So I just
okay.
wonder if that should be increased, but it's probably just putting
It should be increased, definitely.
So
And
when
we're,
does that decision?
I'd like to have that discussion with the Hotel Accommodation Association. And there's also a lot of abuse in the pass system right now too, that we're finding that,
Oh, really?
yeah, the hotels are giving their passes to their employees or to their family members, so then it makes for awkward conversations at the front desk. Yeah, because my staff tend to catch on to what's
Yeah.
happening, so they'll confront the
Small town,
patron,
too,
and then we have to phone the hotel operator and advise them. So it's just having that conversation with everyone again.
So is that something then, I think I recall when we updated the fees bylaw, I remember reading that in there. Is that something we can only update when we, or can we just update the fees bylaw whenever we really choose to update the bylaw?
We've been doing it on an annual basis. I think in September is usually when we review the fees.
Okay.
And then we submit those requests to the administration department, and then the manager of legislative services prepares the draft bylaw for council to review.
Okay, so we'd expect it in the fall.
Yeah,
Is that
well,
right?
Ingrid and I have been having some discussions about that cost and how we would approach the accommodation association.
Yeah.
They're very resistant to any increases. So
Yeah.
it has been a challenge in the years. I've slowly tried to up it like by 10% or 5%, and they resist it quite a bit.
But it's also, well, they're hesitant, but they have to understand it's a municipality service and the taxpayers are theoretically subsidizing their profits, though, in a sense.
Nicole?
They won't like that.
I would love to see a conversation around using the technology to make that sliding scale fee so that it would be dependent on the usage. So a bigger hotel sending lots of customers would pay more and have no problem with that, but a smaller B&B would not be stuck with that same massive bill. I think that would be a good conversation to include. The other part of it as well, I was learning about, I'm trying to remember the wording of it, was corporate health plans, and there was an opportunity to get passes for your employees, something along those lines, but there were certain regulations in place, and I had never had a chance to reach in to learn more about it, but it's something that I would be interested in as an employer. And I think that if the hotels had an opportunity where their employees could get a pass based on this corporate health plan that would separate them out from the guests, then that might create an avenue to charge appropriately and encourage more use of that amazing facility.
Yeah, and so right now, that corporate health plan is you can get a 6-month pass or a 1-year pass, is that correct, Lori, with those?
Your worship, I think Nicole's referring to the 20% discount
Okay.
for other businesses in the community that have a health and wellness program for their
Okay.
employees.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so there's some paperwork, and if they fill out that paperwork that's supported by their employer, then they get a 20% discount on passes at the aquatic center.
Oh, great,
as well.
thank you. Thanks for clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else before we get to these motions?
You're saying the passes, you usually sell them for September to September, but then the fees get reevaluated in September. Is that like awkward timing? Like, would it be beneficial to just do it sooner for you guys?
It is awkward timing, but we can figure something out.
Okay.
Okay. Item 4A. Somebody want to make this motion, please? Cody?
That the committee of the whole recommend to council that the 2019-2033 long-term financial plan be approved as presented or amended, because it's not been amended, I
Yeah.
think. As amended to the public on March 7, 2019. And
Want to do them two separate
that
things?
to me,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the first one. Is there a seconder for that, Jackie? Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 4A2.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
we'll do
Cody.
it then. That the city's 2019, that the committee of the whole recommend to council that the city's 2019-2023 financial plan and 2019 tax rate bylaws be prepared for council's consideration on the basis of the 2019 to 2033 long-term financial plan.
Your seconder, Jackie. Any further discussion on that motion? Stephen? Mike?
Just want to, is there any appetite here to have a little more discussion on the total tax increase? Because if there isn't, there isn't. You know, there's no point spinning my wheels, but.
I'm comfortable with what we've ended up with.
Right.
I think you guys have pared it down fairly well, and I'm appreciative of that. I personally am comfortable with that.
Yeah, I just thought I'd check in with
No, that's fine.
fellow counselors,
Michael?
because I still see like, maybe, to me, it's still too high, and there's not much left to work with. 1% capital increase to capital reserves, and there's one possibly on the, anyway, I just thought I'd check in.
Okay.
I just want to clarify that the relative tax rates for commercial, residential, we still decide that later.
We do, and we'll probably change the timing of the way we do it next year, because at this point, we're kind of locked into leaving it at 4.5, like even across the board, because it's gone out to the public at 4.5%, so. But we will definitely still have that conversation, and then we'll talk about timing for next year and how we'll do it.
Great.
Yeah. And previous councils, just if I can interject, my understanding is previous councils have philosophically committed to trying to get them a little closer, because the commercial was way out of whack with provincial norms versus the residential.
I guess somebody in the email put they wanted commercial to go way up, so.
Well, everybody's gonna have an opinion.
Yeah.
So we haven't voted on this, correct? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion that's on the table? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And ask for termination of the meeting. Nicole, Michael, meeting's terminated. All those in favor? Yep, good, we're done.